thank you to James and Sharon for joining us today. So if you wouldn't mind, just start by introducing yourselves.
So I'm Sharon Palmer. I'm the National Environmental Permitting Manager at Tarmac. I've worked there for just over 5 years. So my team is responsible for ensuring that we have all the right environmental permits and licenses we need as a company to operate.
And I'm James Dodds. I'm a consulting hydrogeologist, and I'm the owner and chairman of a consulting company called Envireau Water. I've been working in the minerals sector for 30 years or so. And I'm also a fellow at the Institute.
Today we're just going to do some fairly frequently asked questions around current issues with water management. So can I start by just asking, what is the current situation with regards to water abstraction licensing and the transition period?
So as many of you will know, the regulations for abstraction for dewatering quarries changed beginning of 2018, and we were given 2 years during which we had to apply for abstraction licenses, and that period was called the transitional period. We thought it was going to end at the end of 2019. Thanks, Sharon. However, in December of 2019, the government extended that period to the end of June of this year, so June 2020. If you still haven't submitted a transitional arrangements application for your dewatering that was occurring prior to 2018, then you have been given a stay of execution until the end of June of this year. I would be extremely surprised if there would be any extension beyond that period.
And the EA have said about 180, 200 applications they've had in England, something like that, I think, for dewatering of quarries. So it was substantially fewer than they'd forecast, I think, but we're not quite sure whether the forecast was quite right.
Yeah, I would agree. The agency are concerned that the applications are far fewer than what they were expecting. I think there is a realisation in the agency that their estimates may have been a little high. At the end of the day, I think, Sharon, it is what it is, and people have to accept that if they don't get applications in through the transitional arrangements, they will not get the benefits of that process, and the benefits of that process are very big from a licensing point of view, in that the expectation is that any valid application through the transition arrangements will be granted a license, and that isn't the case when we talk about new licenses or new water.
So from Tarmac's perspective, we've submitted 44 applications in total, so 40 of those in England and 4 in Wales. So all our Welsh applications have been verified, so they've been accepted as being decent applications affected by the regulators. So I think we've got 2 left to verify by the EA in England, so we're expecting those to be done in the next few weeks. So it's been a fairly okay process, I think. We've worked hard. We knew we had a deadline till the end of December, and that's what we aimed for. So we got most of our applications in good time. And the verification process, apart from 1 or 2 questions, has gone very well. But we've worked hard to make sure those applications have gone in with what the agencies need, really, to make sure that they're verified.
Yeah, and our experience is very, very similar. I'm pleased to say that the applications that we made for you, Sharon, have been validated, and we're still seeing some questions and queries come through from the Environment Agency, which, if you're seeing those come through, you do need to respond quickly to keep your process going. And I think our advice on answering queries is just simply answer the questions that have been asked, provide the evidence that's being asked for, and keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate your answer. The agency aren't looking for lots of complicated answers. They just need to be able to tick off the query that they've posed.
Yeah, it's not a determination, is it? It's a validation at the end of the day.
Exactly, yeah.
If I've had my historic water use validated under the transition arrangements, do I need to do anything now?
My advice is that you keep an eye on things. The next stage for the Environment Agency after validation is determination of the licence. That process essentially involves the Environment Agency going through the application in more detail and preparing an abstraction licence. They may have some further questions to ask if they feel there's points of detail that that they don't understand. But more importantly, you would expect, or you could request, that they issue you a draft license to make sure that the details that they've put into the license are correct with respect to your application. We all make mistakes, and abstraction licenses are a legal document, and it gets frustrating when there's been a typo or a misunderstanding in the final thing. The determination process is split out over 3 years, so the Environment Agency have to determine the licenses by the end of, correct me when I'm wrong, Sharon, 2022, isn't it?
Yeah, December 2022.
In essence, what they're doing is taking different parts of the country or different catchments and doing all the applications together, not only the minerals applications, but other sectors that are affected by the regulations as well, so that they have a consistent approach to the way in which they're licensing in that period. You can ask the Environment Agency which block of time your application sits in, if you're interested. That's easy now for the first sets of determinations. The key thing is to diarise the fact if you're going to be in a couple of years' time, so that you don't forget about the operations that are going on.
Yeah, and I'd say, don't just forget about it, because it only covers what you've applied for. So as we know, quarries operations move on. So if you're a sand and gravel quarry, you might be moving into a new phase, you might be going deeper into a hard rock quarry. So just because you've made a transitional, you only made it for what you made it for. So it may well be that you need to look and think, well, is that covered, or do I need to look at making a new application because I'm significantly pumping more volume of water or moving into a different area? So it's definitely one not to be forgotten about. I mean, it may well be that actually when it comes to the determination of that transitional, it's no longer relevant to what you're actually doing. So you need to continue to think about your operations and whether it's a transitional still, or whether actually you need to think about applying for new applications at some point. And I'd also say as well, think about measuring or metering your abstractions. The EA did accept different types of evidence during the transitional applications, but they are certainly expecting operators to have better data going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Sharon, because the way abstraction licenses are written and the way the system operates is that virtually any change, any material change that you make in the quarry, which could be as simple as moving a pump from one place to another, can potentially require a new water license application. One of our recommendations to operators is to keep in mind your site water management plan or your process diagram, have that pinned on an office wall somewhere, and if you're having a discussion about changes in the way you're managing water, looking at that diagram and going, does it change anything on there?
That's good tip.
And if the answer to that is yes, you will almost certainly need to apply for a variation or a new water application. You cannot forget about water now. It is a continually moving feast.
Yeah, transitionals was the first step, definitely. It's, going forward, it's new applications that are really going to be the challenge and the issue.
Yeah, I agree.
What does the new water application process involve?
At the end of the day, you do just fill in a form and submit it to the Environment Agency. However, the difficult part of the process is drawing together the technical information and evidence base to support that application and essentially demonstrate that whatever it is you're doing, dewatering or supplying water to a concrete plant or whatever it is you're doing, is not going to have an environmental impact. So in essence, the challenge is environmental impact assessment.
So during the planning stage, predominantly?
Yeah, so that process, the gathering of that information, is not dissimilar to the process that you go through for planning application, for an environmental statement, for a planning application. The difference is that you've got a different audience for that information. In a planning application, you're writing reports that are going to be essentially read and decided upon by the Mineral Planning Authority. For an abstraction license application, that decision maker is the Environment Agency. And the Environment Agency decision-making process is very different. It's based on science, it's based on evidence, It isn't based on balance. To a large extent, the Environment Agency are very much less interested in whether you're employing lots of people or whether it's good for the environment in a general sense, or there's benefits in other places. They are looking very much narrower agenda, and they will only tick off their boxes with sound evidence. Because we're working in the water environment, gathering that evidence can take time. By time, I mean certainly months, probably at least a year, possibly longer than a year in certain circumstances. In order to gather that evidence, we've got to put instrumentation into the ground, into the field. The planning and design of that takes time. The big issue, in my view, is time. Time is also money, so cost is a big.
And of course, we've been a little bit on the back foot since the regulations changed, because you've got your transitional, but if you had any need to submit a new application, you had to do that from the sort of 1st of January 2018.
That's right.
So that has been a challenge for us for some sites where we hadn't dewatered for the past 7 years previously. Maybe they were mothballed. More generally, they were mothball sites, or where we were getting 1 or 2 new sites coming on, and we've had to submit applications ready for a start date, but we maybe not have had really that time to gather that information and get geared up. So that has been a bit of a challenge over the past 12 months in terms of submitting those applications, particularly while everybody is still learning. We're still learning, and the regulators are still learning as well. But that has really taught us that what we need to do is make sure we plan properly. So, really look forward to the next 1, 2, potentially 3, 5 years really, and look and see what is happening or you think will be happening on that site, and where you'll be and what you need to plan for now in terms of putting in new boreholes, gathering that baseline data and information to make sure that you can put that application in a timely way, that when you come to need it, it will actually have been determined by the regulator. And that determination, it depends on the site, but I would say at least 6 months. For a more complex site, you might be looking at 12. So you really need to be looking 2, 3 years ahead, don't you?
And absolutely. Another big change is the way in which water is actually managed on site in a practical way. The design of settlement lagoons, clean water ponds, the discharge of water from the site all affect the type of abstraction license that you will eventually apply for. In order to design the evidence gathering exercise and the technical assessments, you need to know what the water management system will look like on that quarry at the beginning. Otherwise, you're going to collect wrong data on the wrong thing. That is a big shift in approach from the traditional way in which water management has been designed on quarries, which tended to come in after a planning application had been granted and a site had moved from an estates team or a lands team into an operations team. And the operations team would then, in a fairly practical and pragmatic way, design the water management system roughly in line with any planning conditions that were in place. So the big shift is that thinking process about some fairly detailed aspects of the water management on any particular site needs to come right to the beginning of the process and be aligned with the early land or estate discussions or land purchase discussions and the design of the planning application process. I think that's a big shift of the industry, Sharon.
Absolutely. And of course, that handover, isn't it? When you've got your permission and you've got your license, like you said, it's then down to the ops guys to actually make that work in practice, and they need to understand what they need to be doing.
Yeah.
And absolutely, that's a shift there where you may have some quite complex water management things you need to put into practice. You need to be making sure that your operational teams are understanding why that's what they need to do and why they need to do it, because if they start to detour from that, then that's when you can start to get in a few issues with both your regulator and your planners as well.
While the process isn't overly complicated and it's not dissimilar to a planning application process, the big difference is time.
And I would say look at do a bit of a risk assessment, look at your risk factors. So we're probably, maybe got 5 or 10 applications this year to put in, the same next year. And what we're looking is, where are these sites? What is the water availability in those areas? What is your Water Framework Directive status? And how may that impact the decision making of the Environment Agency, and what you might need to do in terms of looking at mitigation. So again, really trying to sort of pull those risk factors out and say, actually, we need to think about doing this site differently, because given the WFD status in that area, we think it might be difficult to justify this way of doing it, but we could do it this way. So really thinking ahead and, of the scenario that you're faced in front of you.
And that's just made me think of another aspect of that, and the timing. And something you said earlier, Sharon, about we're all going up a learning curve, including the regulators. And that's true. And I think early engagement with the regulators to talk through the challenges, to get their input into the way in which you're thinking about a site, thinking about developing the site, and the mitigation that you're likely to put in is really valuable, because the Environment Agency and Natural Resources Wales haven't got very much experience of quarries, because they've not themselves regulated the dewatering. So don't sit back and assume that they've got a high level of expertise. They've got the expertise in the licensing process. That's what their day job is. The industry's got the expertise in quarrying, and those two things need to come together, because the gap is where we're going to end up with problems of normal communication problems that lead to bad decision making.
And I suppose not just think about the dewatering aspects, because a lot of quarries have consumptive aspects as well.
Yes.
And we really need to now tie all those things together. So any decision making around any new types of plant or anything that's going in there, really has to look at that holistic water management of the site, doesn't it, to make sure that they're being picked up. And again, there's the water availability in that area, and it's not going to cause any issues, because if you can't get the water for your plant, it's going to be pretty difficult to operate it.
Yeah, and I think we haven't sort of driven this point home yet, but the abstraction license, it is effectively, like the planning permission, a license to operate the site. If you need an abstraction license for dewatering because you need to dewater and you haven't got one, you will not be able to operate. It's at the same level as a planning permission. We mustn't forget that.
So how do I know what type of license to apply for?
So there are 3 types of abstraction license. There's what's referred to as a full license, a transfer license, and then a third one, which is less relevant to the quarrying industry, which is called a temporary license. I won't talk about the temporary license, just for the sake of brevity more than anything else. A full license is used when you're effectively using the water that you're abstracting. An example for quarrying would be mineral washing, concrete batching, the addition of water into an asphalt mix, or wheel wash, domestic use in offices and toilets and that sort of thing. Anything where we're actually using the water, we need to use a full license. A transfer license would be used where we're literally moving the water from one place to another place without any intervening use, is the term that's used. So we're not using any of that water, we're not consuming any of that water, we're just moving it from one place to another. Usually in the context of dewatering, from the dewatering system into a nearby river, or from the dewatering system into a lagoon. In simple terms, that's the situation. It becomes a little bit more complicated when we look at lagoons and reservoirs and where the water is actually going to, and whether things are connected to rivers or whether things are connected to groundwater. So on complex quarries, the type of licenses and where those licenses apply can get quite complicated. And I would strongly recommend that operators keep a process diagram, a simple schematic of the movement of water around the quarry, where that water's stored, whether that storage is sealed or in connection with groundwater.
So where you've got lined lagoons, things like that's really been important, hasn't it, to draw out?
Absolutely, and whether movement of water is pumped between lagoons or whether it's a gravity discharge can be important, and where that water eventually ends up. That diagram greatly helps in identifying where licenses are required and what type of licenses are required.
And you can end up with a mix of licenses on the same site, so you could end up with a full and a transfer.
That's right, and you can end up with full licenses for dewatering and transfer licenses from different parts of the quarry to different places. So it can get complicated, but the starting point is understanding how water's moving around. The Environment Agency will help, and Natural Resources Wales will help in sorting out the detail of that, or you may have internal resources that can help you with that as well.
Yeah, and I would say a nice simple schematic is really well appreciated by both the regulators, isn't it, to be able to pull out those, actually what's happening on the ground. They seem to really like those just simple schematics.
Yeah, absolutely, and certainly in the applications we do, we prepare two key figures. One is usually a Google Earth image showing where water's moving around in the real world, if you like. And then we convert that to a simple line and block diagram that really simplifies it and just highlights the key components of the system. And as I say, out of that, the license types and locations sort of naturally falls once you know the rules about how to apply.
This might be a good opportunity as well to talk about charges that the regulators apply. So a transfer application has a one-off charge when you apply. So it's $1,500 for that application at the minute. Doesn't have an annual subsistence charge like the full applications, where they have a much smaller application charge, which is 135 at the minute, James.
At the moment,
very low at the minute. And you have an annual subsistence charge based on the volume. It's important to say that the EA are looking to consult on those charges. I would say raising those charges almost definitely. That consultation is due sometime spring, early summer is pretty much where we are for implementation in April 2021. So look out for that.
Yeah, and I think the expectation is the application charges could rise quite significantly over and above.
Particularly for the full applications,
yes.
Almost definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it matter if the water we use for dewatering is mainly rainwater?
That's a really good question, and yes, it does matter. It matters greatly. There is what is effectively an exemption in the regulations and around abstraction licensing that says if you're abstracting wholly or mainly rainwater, then you don't need an abstraction license, or more correctly, if the water level in your quarry is controlled wholly or mainly by rainfall, you don't need an abstraction license. That is quite a big get out, because if that is the case in your quarry, then obviously all the things about timing, environmental impact assessment, everything else falls away. So it is something to check very early on in your thought processes and your decision making. It really only affects the clay sector, where obviously there's very little groundwater coming in if you're extracting clay. The hard rock sector, so whinstone, gritstone, that sort of thing could be affected. Slate sector is an important one, and that sort of thing. It's unlikely to affect limestone quarries, but it could, and it's unlikely to affect sand and gravel, although in theory it could, but it's unlikely. There are some agreements in place with the Environment Agency over what we might consider wholly or mainly to be. It's not a simple decision point as to what wholly or mainly means, but there is an agreement between the British Ceramics Confederation and the Environment Agency over some approaches to that. The situation in Wales is slightly different in that Natural Resources Wales interpret what it means in a slightly different way. So if you're operating in Wales and England, don't immediately assume that what has been agreed in England will also be agreed in Wales. It is different. That's probably the key point, I think.
I think we've been We've got a handful where we've looked at that, and maybe a couple where we've decided yes, it probably is wholly rainwater. And all I would say is just document that your decision making. So particularly if it's a transitional one, because you don't want to be questioned on it in a couple of years. So just make a bit of a record or a memo, and we've said, right, these are the steps we've looked at. This is why, because often that information is lost, isn't it? If you're a couple of years down the way. So yeah, if you come to that decision and for you it's pretty clear, just make a record of that, your decision making steps. So if you are challenged in the future, you can go back to that and say, well, this is the reason why we took that decision at that moment in time.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. In essence, the decision as to whether it is or it isn't wholly or mainly rainwater is yours to make, because if you make that decision, then you don't need to make an application. You could make an application, but in all likelihood, the Environment Agency or Natural Resources Wales will probably go, thank you very much, and process it. If it is obviously wholly or mainly rainwater, then they may come back and say, no, it's fine, you don't need to. But in essence, the decision is yours to make, then you don't make an application. And as Sharon said, it's really important in that circumstance that you capture your decision-making process, because that's your first line of defence, if you like, if it's queried by the regulator.
And again, I'd go back to saying as well, just don't sit back on that decision. We have got one site where we are pretty confident at the minute it is wholly and mainly rainwater, but actually, because how we're going to work that quarry going forward, it may well be that we actually are going to go down into the groundwater, and at that point may need to make an application. So again, it's not just about it's about looking at the situation now, but continuing to look at that to make sure that it's still a valid decision as you go forward.
Yeah, I think it's important not to hang too much on wholly or mainly, unless it's really obvious that it is. So a clay pit that is obviously clay and has no sandstone bands in it or anything is a fairly obvious answer. At the end of the day, something that is possibly wholly or mainly rainwater is unlikely to have a significant environmental impact, and therefore the abstraction licensing process should be fairly straightforward. To err on the side of caution would be far better than finding yourself in a long and expensive legal battle, or a situation where enforcement action's taken and you've got to stop operating.
Yeah, so that's great advice.
So finally then, what about if I have sites in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland?
What we've been talking about today applies to England and Wales. So the transitional arrangements for changes to the abstraction licensing system apply only to England and Wales. The extension to the transitional arrangements that we've talked about only applies to England. If you haven't submitted your transitional arrangements application in Wales, you have missed the boat and would need to stop dewatering and to submit a new water application. Scotland has a totally different set of regulations with respect to water abstraction, and quarry dewatering just fits into those regulations, and that's been in place since 2002 or 3 or something like that. So nothing's changed there. I'm not an expert on Northern Ireland, but my understanding is that that system is very similar to Scotland. But England and Wales regulations apply only to England